It was a nice morning day of the August 2, 2005. 37,000 feet above the Atlantic, Air France Flight 358 is on its way to Toronto Pearson International Airport in Canada with 309 passengers and crew on board. A 6-year-old Airbus A340-300, registered as Foxtrot Golf Lima Zulu Quebec, was built and entered service in 1999, and had made 3,711 flights with a total of 28,246 flight hours under its belt. The A340 is a quad-engine long-range aircraft that took to the skies in the 1990s. Despite having the impressive technology like her late Airbus sisters, the airlines were having very low interest in her. Why? Simple, the four-engine aircraft were too expensive for some airlines to operate and required a lot of maintenance, and the early versions of A340 were considered to be underpowered by many, as they were powered by the less powerful engines. Despite this, the A340 had a 14-year spotless safety record, having been involved in very few incidents in its years of operation. But none of these were quite as notable as that of Air France Flight 358. This aircraft was flown by two pilots. A 57-year-old Captain Alain Rossi is one of the most experienced captains at Air France with over 15,000 total flight hours. He was known by his colleagues as a well-respected, active, easy gentleman to work with. He began his career with Air Inter in 1973, and when Air Inter merged with Air France in 1997, he began to fly the A320 family and later upgraded to flying the A340 in 2001. A 43-year-old First Officer Frederick Naud was less experienced with 4,500 hours of flight time, but had a length career with Air France. He joined an airline in 1985 as a cabin crew member, but also began his pilot training in 1991. In 1997, he began to work as the first officer for the A320 family and upgraded to flying the A340 on September 11, 2001. Though the two pilots had previously met during simulator training, this was their first time flying together. Besides them, there is a passenger seating on the flight deck. This person had taken advantage of perks from a relative worked for Air France, which included riding in the jump seat for free. At around 10 a.m., Toronto's local time, the pilots made a request through the Aircraft Communication Addressing and Report System, or ACARS for short, for the weather information of a number of airports in eastern Canada, including Toronto, and their alternative at Ottawa. It wasn't until 10:44 a.m. when they finally received what they requested. Here's what the message they got back. Looks so confusing, right? What you have seen here is Meteorological Aerodrome Report, or METR, a format used for reporting weather information for pilots. And here's what it says in the decoded form. Meteorological Aerodrome Report, 1400 hours Universal Time Coordinated, Toronto Pearson International Airport. Wind coming directly from the north at 4 knots, visibility 15 miles, temperature 28 Celsius. Few clouds at 3,500 and 26,000 feet, altimeter 30.27. Remark, cumulus and cirrus clouds. All of this can be summarized as partly cloudy, warm with a light breeze from the north, which meant it was a pleasant morning in Toronto. However, it didn't stay there for long. At the time when Flight 358 was cruising over the Atlantic, the nice weather was quickly swapped with a bad one. Toronto has now been hammered by powerful thunderstorms, strong winds, and heavy rains. Local airport authorities had issued the red alert, which means it's too dangerous for ground crews to work on the planes, as they could get struck by lightnings. Because of this, some flights were forced to divert to Montreal and New York airports. So, by the time Flight 358 approached into the Toronto area, it was put into the holding pattern to await their approach clearance. A few minutes later, Flight 358 was given permission to descend and prepare for a landing at the airport. The captain handed over his control to the first officer, who descended the aircraft into the thunderstorm. While Flight 358 descended into the thunderstorm, 2 flights ahead of Air France did manage to land at Toronto successfully. The ATC notified Flight 358 that weather conditions were deteriorating and the flights that landed in Toronto earlier reported of poor braking effectiveness, which meant the runway surface is wet. Toronto Airport had 4 runways. Flight 358 was assigned to land at runway 24 left, with measuring of 2,700 meters. It was the shortest runway at Toronto. Even though Flight 358 did receive updated weather reports, they were perhaps not prepared for what they were about to get into. Instead of diverting to other airports, they continued the approach to Toronto. On the time when Flight 358 was making its landing attempt, there was a sudden change in wind direction, from a headwind to a tailwind, and visibility dropped. The wind direction by the time the plane touched down would change again into a crosswind. When aircraft is about to reach the airport, the pilots deployed flaps and landing gears. Flight 358 is moments from landing. By this point, the pilots had descended beyond the decision height and began passing over the foot of the runway. They believed their opportunity for a missed approach had expired. So, they continued the landing. To encounter a loss of airspeed and decrease the rate of descent, the first officer disconnected both autopilot and autothrust, and took the manual flight controls for landing and increased thrust. This caused the massive aircraft to lift above its glide path over the runway, in what pilots like to call float. A float occurs on landing in the flare phase, where the pilot pulls the nose in preparation for a touchdown and the aircraft is flying too fast for landing. What happened next is, when the pilot lifts the aircraft's nose, it generated a lift that pilots didn't want to. In this case, the shortness of runway 24 left, and the need for the aircraft to reduce its airspeed, meant the A340 didn't touch down until it was nearly halfway down the runway. Obviously, this meant there was less room for the plane to stop. But before we reach the end of the runway, let's take a step back on how the pilots slow the plane on landing. First, there are the spoilers. As per the landing checklist, the pilot had armed them to deploy on touchdown. This occurred as normal once the plane was on the ground. Secondly, there are the wheel brakes, which the pilots stepped both rudder pedals forward like when you stepped on the brake to slow your car down. However, the pilots were informed ahead of time that braking action was reduced due to the weather conditions and the runway was soaked wet. This would have increased the need for the plane to come to a stop. Lastly, and this is the big one, the reverse thrust. Reverse thrust basically redirects thrust produced by the engines forward, instead of backward. Pilots usually only engage the reverse thrust on landing at touchdown. They are never used in the air. Though investigators later found the engine's reverse thrusters to be on in the wreckage, they weren't activated until the plane was running out of runway. They later discovered that the pilots didn't deploy the reverse thrust until 17 seconds after touchdown. All of these factors, the poor weather, shorter and wet runway, which reduced braking effectiveness, landing beyond the touchdown area, and failure to engage the reverse thrust upon touchdown meant that by the time the plane was decreasing the speed, they didn't have enough room for completely stop on the runway. At just after 4 p.m. local time, Air France Flight 358 overran and came to stop in a ravine at the end of the runway, near Highway 401. The aircraft was still in one piece on landing. Now came the task of evacuating the aircraft. Some passengers noticed a fire outside of the aircraft, and smoke began filling the cabin. The plane was on fire, the pure air replaced with the smell of jet fuel. The evacuation process was impeded somewhat due to multiple factors. Some of the doors failed to open as intended. Flight attendants chose not to open the 2 left rear doors due to a fire hazard outside. Some of the passengers were reported to have taken their belongings with them. In the evacuation process, over 40 people reported injuries to varying degrees, roughly a dozen of them seriously so and required medical attention. In the cockpit, Captain Rosai suffered some injuries, but First Officer Nod wasn't. Both were able to escape, with the first officer being the last person to leave the burning aircraft. The passing motorists had slowed down and stopped their vehicles to help those in the crash. Many people were rescued and taken to safety. Shortly after this, the aircraft was engulfed by flames, but thanks to continuous rain and the firefighting foam agent, which prevented the entire aircraft from being completely consumed by flames. All 309 people on board survived. The media outlets labeled the outcome of this accident a miracle. All of these, thanks to a group of veteran flight attendants of Flight 358, and the efforts of Toronto residents, to make sure that everybody had been rescued and brought to safety. After the disaster, the captain had stopped flying due to his serious injuries. The first officer was suspended for 3 months. The Transportation Safety Board of Canada recommended all Canadian airports to increase the distances of overrun area to prevent the similar accident from happening again in the future. The A340 continued to fly for Air France until its retirement in 2020. Hello there, if you enjoy this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Do it now for more future videos. And I will see you with another disaster occurred. Stay safe.